You never cared about Dad's legacy, my brother said, waving the forged will, until the lawyer opened the sealed one. At the will reading, the paper snaps in Dwayne's hand like a flag in wind, and the sound of it fills my father's living room the way a slammed door does. I can smell the funeral still on all of us, carnations and the Swedish chemical bite of the mortuary, the kind that gets into your coat and stays. My brother is standing in front of Dad's brick fireplace, under the shelf where the signed baseball bat has rested in its glass case for 31 years, and he is holding a single sheet of paper over his head like a preacher holding scripture. You never cared about Dad's legacy, Carolyn, he says, loud enough for Aunt Reba and the whole crowded room. You ran off to Kansas City to play businesswoman, while I stayed here and bled for this family. Dad knew it. He left the store to me. It's all right here in his handwriting. My cousin Marisol looks at me with pity, which is worse than the accusation. I set my purse down on the arm of the sofa, very gently, and I did not say a single word. Because Dwayne did not know what I knew. He had never once asked who signed the papers when Dad went into the hospital in March. He assumed, the way he had assumed his whole life, that being loud was the same as being in charge. Let me take you back, because you have to understand how a man convinces himself he can forge his own father's name and sleep at night. Our father was Raymond Beck, and he opened Beck's Sporting Goods on Main Street in Joplin, Missouri in 1979 with a $6,000 loan from Mercantile Bank and a handshake he honored for 40 years. I was born in 1974, Dwayne in 1977. We grew up in the back stockroom of that store, doing our homework on a folding card table between boxes of Rawlings gloves and Coleman lanterns, breathing in the smell of new rubber and leather oil. That smell is my whole childhood. Dad let me run the register when I was 9 because I was quick with the numbers and I didn't get flustered when a line formed. He used to put his hand on the top of my head and tell the customers, "This one's got a ledger for a brain." He never said that about Dwayne, and I think that's where a lot of this started, in a place too small and too old to name. We were not a family with money. Mom died of ovarian cancer in 1991 when I was 17 and Dwayne was 14, and after that, the store was the only steady thing in the house. Dad worked open to close 6 days a week. On Sundays, he sat in his recliner and watched the Cardinals and drank one Busch beer, exactly one, and if they won, he'd take that bat down out of the case and hold it across his knees the whole 9th inning, like a talisman. The bat is a Louisville Slugger signed by Stan Musial in 1963, given to my grandfather at a fan appreciation game at Old Sportsman's Park. And it is the one thing in our family that ever felt like an heirloom instead of a bill. Dad used to say it was worth more than the house. He was probably right. A reputable auction house appraised it at $11,500 2 years ago when I made him get it insured. I was the one who made him get it insured. That's the part of me you need to hold on to. I left Joplin in 1996 for a job at a wholesale distributor in Kansas City, and Dwayne took it personally, like leaving town was a thing I did to him. But I didn't run off to play businesswoman. I went to community college at night for 4 years, got an associate's in accounting, and then a bachelor's from UMKC in 2003 while working full-time. By 2011, I was a licensed CPA with my own small practice off Ward Parkway, doing books and estate work for restaurant owners and dentists and the occasional trucking company. Estate work. Wills, trusts, executors, probate. I want you to remember that I did this for a living, because Dwayne never bothered to learn what I actually did all day. To him, I was just the sister in the city who's too good for us. The early years with Dwayne weren't all bad. I need to be fair. When we were kids, he was funny, genuinely funny, and he'd cover for me when I snuck out. When Mom was dying, he was the one who slept on the floor of her hospital room so she wouldn't wake up alone. I loved that boy. Somewhere in the years between, he curdled. He married Tanya in 1999, they had 2 kids, and he never left Joplin. never left the store. And I think staying still while I moved turned into a wound he picked at until it got infected. Dad kept him on at Beck's as manager, paid him a real salary, $52,000 a year by the end, plus the apartment above the store, rent-free. Dwayne told everyone he ran Beck's, and in the day-to-day, he did. But the store's actual books came to me. Every quarter, Dad mailed me a shoebox of receipts and register tapes, and I did the reconciliation for free because he was my father and because I loved that store's smell more than I loved almost anything. So I saw things Dwayne thought were invisible. The first wrong note was in 2016. The store's cash deposits didn't match the register totals, off by $340 one month, $510 the next. Small enough to look like sloppiness. I mentioned it to Dad on the phone and he said, "Oh, Dwayne borrows from the till sometimes. He pays it back." He didn't pay it back. I built a spreadsheet. Over 11 months, the gap was $6,880. I never accused anyone. I just kept the spreadsheet, and I kept a copy on a thumb drive in the fireproof box in my closet, next to the Bat's insurance rider and my own will. That is who I am. I don't shout, I file. There was a smaller thing that same year, and it tells you everything about how Dwayne saw the world. He replaced the store's old hand-lettered sign, the one Dad had painted himself in 1979, green letters on white, Beck's Sporting Goods, EST, right here, with a cheap vinyl banner he bought online for $189, and he threw the original in the dumpster behind the loading dock. Perry fished it out that night and hid it in the rafters of the stockroom without telling anyone. When I found out, years later, I understood that the two of them, my father and Perry, had been quietly saving things from Dwayne for a long time. Dad never even knew about the sign. Perry just did it, the way you'd pull a photograph out of a fire. The second wrong note came at Thanksgiving 2018. We were all at Dad's, the house on Pearl Street, and Dwayne had had 4 beers and he started in on how the store was dying, and Dad needed to get with the times and let him take over completely, sign it all over, for tax reasons. I watched Dad's face close like a store at night. Later, in the kitchen, drying dishes, Dad said to me quietly, "Carrie, if anything ever happens to me, you handle it, not your brother, you. Promise me." I said I promised. The faucet was dripping. It had dripped for years. Dad never fixed it, just put a folded paper towel in the sink to soften the sound at night. I can still hear that drip. I promised him over the sound of that drip. The third wrong note was money, and it was uglier. In early 2020, Dwayne took out a $40,000 line of credit against the store's inventory, without telling Dad. Forged nothing yet, just used a power of attorney Dad had signed for medical stuff and stretched it into financial authority it never granted. I caught it in the books. When I called Dad, he got very quiet. And then he said the thing that changed everything. "I'm going to fix this properly. I want you to help me do it right." That was March 2021. What Dad did, what we did together, is the hinge of this whole story. So let me lay it out plain the way I'd lay it out for a client. Dad drove up to Kansas City. He sat in my office off Ward Parkway on a Tuesday, and we hired a real estate and estate attorney named Gordon Sinclair, a careful man in his 60s who'd done probate in Missouri for 35 years. In front of Sinclair and 2 witnesses, Dad revoked every prior will and every power of attorney. He signed a new last will and testament dated April 9th, 2021. And here is the plain sentence, the one Dwayne never imagined. The new will named me, Carolyn Beck, as the sole executor of his estate, and it left Beck's Sporting Goods, the building, the business, the inventory, and the museal bat, to me outright, with a $60,000 cash bequest to Dwayne and the apartment lease honored for 1 year so he wouldn't be on the street. Dad's reasoning was simple, and he said it on the recording. Because Sinclair, being careful, video recorded the signing the way he does for any client he thinks might face a contest. Dad looked into that camera and said, "Dwayne's been stealing from me for years, and I've let it go because he's my son. But he'll run this place into the ground or sell it for parts. Carolyn built something honest out of nothing. She'll keep my name on that door. This is my decision, sound mind, no pressure from anyone." Then he held up the bat. He brought it with him, wrapped in a beach towel in the back seat. And he said, "And this stays in the store. That's the whole point of the store." Sinclair filed the original will in his firm's vault in Kansas City. Dad took a signed copy home to the fireproof safe in his bedroom closet. I kept nothing but my knowledge and a duplicate of the video on that same thumb drive in my closet. Nobody else knew. Not Dwayne, not Tanya, not the aunts. Dad wanted it that way. "Let it be a quiet thing," he said. "No sense starting a war while I'm still around to hear it." Dad had a stroke on February 28, 2026, and died in Freeman Hospital on March 3rd. I drove down from Kansas City in 3 hours flat, and I was holding his hand when the monitor went quiet. Dwayne got there 40 minutes later, and the first thing he asked the nurse was whether Dad had said anything about the store. Here is where you see the system tilt toward the loud man, the way it usually does at first. Within a week, before I'd even finished making the funeral arrangements, which I paid for, $9,200 to Mason Woodard because Dwayne's card was having a problem, my brother had gone to the house on Pearl Street, opened Dad's closet, and taken everything out of the fireproof safe. He told the family he'd found Dad's will. The document he produced was a single handwritten page dated January 2026 in what looked like Dad's shaky post-illness handwriting, leaving the entire store and all its contents to Dwayne, and saying, this is a direct quote from the forged page, "My daughter Carolyn made her choice to leave this family and this legacy and wants nothing to do with it." He'd even had it witnessed by Tanya's cousin and a guy who worked the loading dock. And the family believed him. That's the part that cut. Aunt Reba called me and said maybe it was for the best that I had my career and Dwayne had the kids to think about. Marisol texted that she was so sorry about the tension. The whole clan quietly rearranged itself around the idea that I was the daughter who didn't care. Dwayne got a probate attorney in Joplin, a strip mall guy named Pruitt, and filed the handwritten will with the county on March 18th. In Missouri, a holographic will, one entirely in the deceased's hand, can be valid. On paper, at a glance, Dwayne looked like he'd won before the game even started. I let him think that for exactly 11 days. I didn't cry when Aunt Reba called me the daughter who didn't care. I want to be honest about that. There was a moment, sitting in my car in the Freeman parking garage with the engine ticking as it cooled, where I felt something in my chest go from hot to cold, like a valve turning. Grief for my father? Yes, an ocean of it. But underneath the grief was a clean, quiet click. The same feeling I get when a client's numbers finally reconcile to the penny. Dwayne had made a mistake so large he couldn't see the edges of it. He had forged a document to steal a store that was already legally mine to give. He had lied about a father who had recorded himself on video explaining exactly what kind of man his son was. I made one phone call. I called Gordon Sinclair in Kansas City and I said, "Gordon, my father passed. My brother has filed a forged holographic will in Jasper County. I'm the named executor under the April 2021 instrument in your vault." There was a pause, and then Sinclair said, in that dry, careful voice, "Well, then we have some straightforward work to do, don't we?" I could hear him already pulling the file. Straightforward. That word held me together for a month. Here's what quiet competence looks like, because I want you to see that I never raised my voice, never sent a screaming text, never gave Dwayne a single warning shot to duck. First, Sinclair pulled the original April 9th, 2021 will and the signing video from his firm's vault and had a certified copy prepared for the court. The original is self-proving under Missouri statute. It has the notarized affidavits of both witnesses attached, which means it doesn't even require the witnesses to testify to be admitted. It was airtight the day Dad signed it. Second, I contacted the one person inside Beck's Sporting Goods I trusted completely. And this is where I have to tell you about Perry. Perry Hoskins started at Beck's in 1988 as a stock boy, and he never left. He's 66 now, wears the same green Beck's polo he's worn for decades, knows every customer's kid by name, and he loved my father like a brother. Perry had watched Dwayne skim the register for years and had said nothing because it wasn't his place. But when I called him, before I even finished explaining, Perry said, "Carolyn, whatever Dwayne's telling people, I was there the day your dad came back from Kansas City in 2021. He showed me a copy of the real will. He said, and I remember it word for word, 'Perry, no matter what happens, this store goes to Carrie. If my son ever tells you different, you tell the truth.'" Perry had kept his own copy of the register discrepancies too, in a spiral notebook, going back years, because he'd started tracking the shortfalls to protect himself. A 66-year-old clerk with a spiral notebook. That notebook would have won the case by itself. Third, I had a forensic document examiner named Dr. Anita Vo out of St. Louis examine high-resolution scans of Dwayne's holographic page, which were part of the public probate filing. It took her 9 days and cost me $3,400 out of my own pocket. Her report was devastating in the calm way real evidence is devastating. The handwriting showed tracing tremor, consistent with someone slowly copying a signature rather than writing naturally. The ink was a gel formulation not commercially available until late 2023, yet the page was dated January 2026 in a hand meant to look like a dying man's. But the pen strokes had the steady pressure of a healthy 49-year-old, not a stroke patient. She also noted the witnesses had signed with the same pen, same session, same ink. Impossible if, as Dwayne claimed, Dad had signed it alone in his bedroom in January and gotten it witnessed later. There was a night in that stretch, late March, when I drove down to Joplin alone and let myself into the store after closing with the key Dad had given me in 2011. The alarm chirped, and I keyed in Mom's birthday, 0714, the code that had never changed. I walked the aisles in the dark, the Rawlings gloves, the Coleman lanterns, the rack of youth baseball cleats, and I ran my hand along the counter where I'd worked the register at 9 years old. I wasn't there for anything. I just needed to stand inside the thing my father built and remind myself what I was protecting. The floor still creaked in the same 3 spots. That's the closest I came to crying in the whole affair, alone in the dark in aisle 4. And then I locked up and drove back to the hotel and got back to work. Fourth, and I did this last because it was the coldest and the surest, I did not tell Dwayne any of it. I let the machine of probate roll toward its date. Under the process, all interested parties and the family are notified of the formal reading and the filing of the competing will. Sinclair arranged for the certified copy of the real will, the self-proving affidavits, Dr. Vo's report, and, this was Sinclair's idea and it was a beautiful one, a request to play Dad's signing video, to all be presented at a single gathering at the house on Pearl Street on April 14th, with Dwayne's own attorney Pruitt present. Dwayne thought it was going to be the reading of his will. He'd invited the whole family to watch his coronation. He even called me and, magnanimous, said I could come to hear how Dad felt. I said I wouldn't miss it. I want to describe that day precisely because I have earned the right to keep it forever. The house on Pearl Street smelled the way it always had. Old carpet, Dad's pipe tobacco ghosting out of the curtains, even though he'd quit in 2009. 22 people crowded into the living room. The porch light out front had a short in it, and it flickered the whole afternoon. Nobody ever fixed anything in that house. Aunt Reba sat in Dad's recliner like she owned it. Marisol wouldn't meet my eyes. And Dwayne stood at the fireplace under the empty glass case. Because he'd already taken the musial bat home to his own house, that's how sure he was. And he had his forged page in a plastic sheet protector like it was the Constitution. Sinclair came in at 2 o'clock sharp in a gray suit, set his briefcase on the dining table, and Dwayne, grinning, said, "Well, let's get on with it. This is my father's lawyer, everyone. He's here to make it all official." He genuinely believed Sinclair was there for him. He had never once asked who drew up Dad's estate. He had assumed. Sinclair opened the briefcase. He said in that dry voice that carries without ever rising, "I am the attorney who prepared Raymond Beck's last will and testament. I have represented Mr. Beck since 2021. I'm afraid there's been a serious misunderstanding, and in the interest of the family, we're going to clear it up right now." And he laid the certified copy of the April 9th, 2021 will on the dining table, the ribbon and the notary seal catching the light. Dwayne's grin didn't fall all at once. That's the thing about watching a lie collapse. It happens in stages. First, he laughed, a short, ugly bark, and said, "That's old. Dad wrote a new one in January." Sinclair said, "Mr. Beck revoked all prior wills in this instrument, and he executed no valid will after it. The document you filed is dated January 2026. And then Sinclair set down Dr. Vaux's report and read, flat as a grocery list, the line about gel ink not manufactured until 2023. The room went so quiet I could hear the porch light buzzing through the front window. Tanya said, "Dwayne?" Just his name, a question, and he told her to shut up. And that was the moment the family started to turn, because in 30 years, nobody had heard Dwayne talk to his wife like that in front of Aunt Reba. Then Sinclair said, "Mr. Beck also chose to record the signing. He anticipated this." And he opened his laptop and turned it to face the room and pressed play. And there was my father, alive, in the frame, in Sinclair's office, healthy and clear-eyed in his good flannel shirt. And the whole room made a sound like the air being let out of it. Dad looked into the camera and said his piece. Sound mind, no pressure. He said Carolyn built something honest out of nothing. He said Dwayne had been stealing from him for years, and he'd let it go because he was his son, but he wouldn't let him have the store. 22 people heard my dead father, in his own voice, call his son a thief and name me his executor and his heir. And then, I hadn't seen this part of the raw footage Sinclair had, Dad reached down off camera and lifted the musial bat, the very bat that was missing from the case Dwayne was standing under, and he held it up and said, "And this stays in the store. That's the whole point of the store. Carrie knows." I watched my brother's face go the color of the wall behind him. Not red, gray. All the blood in him seemed to drop straight through the floor. He put his hand out on the mantel to steady himself and knocked over one of Mom's ceramic birds, and it broke on the brick, and nobody moved to pick it up. That's edited," he said, but his voice had no bottom to it. "Carolyn made that. She does this for a living. She can fake anything." And that was the second the last card turned over, because Aunt Reba, of all people, said quietly, "Dwayne, that's your father. You can't fake your father." Even Pruitt, his own attorney, was packing his bag. Pruitt actually said out loud to Dwayne, "I'm going to need to withdraw from this. You did not disclose the 2021 instrument to me." And he walked out to his car, and through the flickering porch light, we all watched him go. I stood up then. I had not said one word the entire time. I walked to the dining table, and I picked up the certified will, and I turned to my brother, who had spent a month telling everyone I never cared about Dad's legacy, and I said the only thing I said all day. "I'm the executor, Dwayne. I've been the executor since 2021. Everything from here goes through me." I let that sit. Then, "Bring the bat back to the store by Friday, or the theft of it goes in the police report along with the forgery." He begged. I'll be honest, I didn't expect the begging, and it didn't move me. He followed me out onto the porch under the buzzing light, and he said, "Carrie, come on, we're family, the kids." And I thought about Dad drying dishes over that dripping faucet, making me promise. I said, You should have thought about family before you forged a dead man's name. And I got in my car, which started on the first turn for once, and I drove to a hotel, and I slept 8 hours, the first real sleep since February 28th. The forged will was voided by the Jasper County Probate Court on May 6, 2026. The real will was admitted, self-proving, uncontested, because Pruitt was gone and no attorney in Joplin would touch it after Dr. Vaux's report. Beck's Sporting Goods on Main Street, the building, the business, the inventory, and the Stan Musial bat all became legally, cleanly, permanently mine. The county prosecutor reviewed the forgery. Dwayne pled to a lesser charge to avoid a felony, paid restitution out of his $60,000 bequest until there was almost nothing left of it, and the apartment lease above the store, the one Dad had generously honored for a year, I did not renew. He moved to Carthage. He does not run anything now. He never did. Here is the part I keep for myself, the warm part. The store is mine now, and I kept Perry on at a real salary with real health insurance, $58,000 and full benefits, because a man who keeps a spiral notebook for 38 years out of pure loyalty should never worry about a copay again. I moved my accounting practice down to Joplin, and I run both. The books in the morning, the register in the afternoon. Quick with the numbers, still don't get flustered when a line forms. Marisol came by in June and apologized with her whole face, and I hugged her because she was young and Dwayne is a persuasive man, and grief makes fools of good people. Aunt Reba brings me tomatoes from her garden and doesn't mention any of it, which is her way of saying sorry. On the 4th of July, we closed early and had a cookout in the parking lot behind the store. Perry, Marisol, a handful of the old regulars, the loading dock guy who'd been tricked into witnessing and felt sick about it. Perry grilled. Somebody left a radio on playing the Cardinals game, and when they won in the 9th, I felt Dad in my chest so hard I had to step inside for a minute. That's when I did the last thing. I took the Musial bat. Dwayne had returned it that Friday, wrapped in a Walmart bag, not even a towel, and I carried it up to the front of the store, to the glass case Dad had built behind the register in 1979. I wiped it down with a soft cloth, the way Dad used to, the leather oil smell of the whole store rising up around me. The signature is faded now, 63 years old, but you can still read Musial's looping S. Perry stood in the doorway and watched me and didn't say anything, which is how Perry says the biggest things. And I stood our father's signed bat up in the case behind the register of the store that's mine.